So our next speaker is Nancy Odegaard. She spoke yesterday, and most of you know her as well, so I'll forego her introduction. But her next talk is called Woman-Ochre, a stolen de Kooning painting comes home.
Thanks. So I just want to say, please continue. If you haven't signed the cards, the get well cards, I'd like you to do that. And, oh, microphone? Good. So reminder to sign those cards. Okay, well, I'm going to talk now about something that just really started happening in the last few weeks, and might be a surprise how an ethnographic archaeological object conservator ends up having to authenticate a mid-century de Kooning painting. Well, turns out that most of the conservators in southern Arizona are objects conservators, and that, in fact, on campus, there aren't very many conservators at all, and so I was the one. And I want to just point out that by this story, that what I think almost all conservators could do in a situation, if you narrow the question of what you're trying to do, it's really the observational abilities that we have that cross all kinds of media that allow us to answer questions that aren't necessarily what we see every day. And I think this is a really good example of that. I think any of you in the room here could have done what I did. So let me get started. Just background, reintroduction to de Kooning, a little bit of facts there about how old he was and the situation of his background. The center is, of course, the Woman-Ochre painting, and then the sort of background of this series. The Woman-Ochre is kind of the last in a woman series that was a little bit controversial at the time. He was painting it. He was criticized by his colleague or friend Jackson Pollock. The Woman-Ochre was completed in 1955. It was sold to Mr. Gallagher, who turned out to be a prominent donor to the University of Arizona Museum of Art collection, who donated the painting. And interestingly, I thought, in 1958, it was valued at $6,000. Gallagher later donated almost 200 works, mostly in honor of his son, who had passed away. This painting is was part of a traveling show, and when I knew that, and I actually remembered the painting. It was stolen shortly after I started working at the U of A, and it was a big deal when it was stolen. But knowing that it had traveled, knowing that there were probably conservation records, it had been in institutional life for a long time, that was important. I wanted to see those records and photographs right away when I was asked to be involved. So the painting hung almost for 27 years. The value now keeps changing a little bit, but it's perhaps $160 million painting. That's maybe the most expensive thing I've ever touched. Okay, so I'm not that great at video, but we're gonna try and see if I can start this, maybe. Okay, and then I make it big. Yeah. Okay, this is a 2-minute
On a cool fall morning in November 1985, a man and a woman paid a visit to the University of Arizona Museum of Art, and they went with a purpose. The couple followed a staff member into the museum moments before it was scheduled to open at about 9 a.m. They were allowed to enter. It was, after all, a public art museum that welcomed visitors.
The man went upstairs immediately. The woman intercepted one of the security monitors who was about to go on duty upstairs in the stairwell to discuss a painting that might have been hung in the stairwell at the time.
As the registrar at the museum, Kristen Schmidt cares for the collection, everything from packing and shipping of works that travel to ensuring the proper temperature of the galleries.
Art is essential to being human. It's essential to every part of our life. And so When such a notorious act happens in your backyard, it's unbelievable. It's almost, just too incredible.
What did happen isn't clear, as there were no security cameras at the time, and the guard was distracted by the woman on the stairwell, long enough for the man to move up the stairs and into the gallery, where an abstract painting of a woman hung on the wall.
I think that somebody really wanted it. I think it was a targeted maneuver.
While no one who currently works at the museum worked there at the time, the events of that day still echo here.
It still haunts us 30 years later in all of the decisions that we make regarding the safety of the collection, access to the collection by the public.
Okay. So that's kind of the story as we knew it of how the painting was stolen. It was in the papers a lot at the time, and these are the police sketches. So there was a lot of times people were talking about, is that you? Are you the one? Now it's kind of understood that perhaps Jerry and Rita Altler of Cliff, New Mexico, near Silver City, were involved. Jerry may have been dressed up like a woman, and his son Joseph may have been the younger male figure there. Background about Jerry: he was born in 1930, passed away in 2012. He had worked as a music teacher in the New York City schools, was a professional musician, played the clarinet, and was really proud of all the traveling he and his wife had done. Rita, not sure exactly, she died a few months ago, and I don't know as much about her. She was a speech therapist with the New Mexico schools in the area. They had 2 children. There's not a lot of information about them except that the son, Joseph, if that's him, is actually having psychological care in a hospital now. So the nephew has been interviewed extensively, and I thought it was interesting, he got his Bachelor of Science degree in 1985, same year as the theft, at the University of Arizona. Jerry and Rita wrote 3 books that were all self-published around 2011. There are parts in this first book, The Cup and the Lip, that talk about thefts from museums. So evidence is moving towards their being the people that did it. Also, they had a small red sports car that had 2 doors. So that's also a pretty good link. The heroes, acknowledged by the press and the Museum of Art, is David Van Auker. He's the fellow on the right in the front, and his life partner and business partners own a Manzanita Ridge Furniture and Antiques. And they were called in by the real estate agent to look at the estate. The nephew that was handling the estate seems to have just sort of hired a real estate agent to kind of clear out the property. And so there was sort of a contact made, and the call went to the curator, Olivia Miller, who you'll see in a next video. And a team got a call on Thursday, back and forth. Friday they headed out. They had FBI involved in 2 states, a lot of drama, and collected the painting, packed it up. And this is the picture on the right, far right, is Olivia, just very emotional, overseeing the painting in the lawyer's home office. Little sidebar that's not in the press is that David Van Auker told me at the press conference in private that they had talked to 2 attorneys. He was kind of scared as to having this valuable a painting. And the lawyers were suggesting kind of a ransom or a reward money before he give it up. And he just was horrified at that. So kind of a strange thing. So I got a call on Sunday morning from the vice president's office asking me to be ready and if I could come in and help with a preliminary authentication. They wanted to have a conservator. So as I said, I'm kind of the one on campus. My lab is the conservation lab. We've got a little team. Teresa Moreno, who you know is there, she was away. And the Center for Creative Photography has a conservation lab now, but we're in between. Jay Gutierrez, who'd worked with photographs, is now in New York, and the next conservator is not coming for a few more months. So, okay, I guess handle a lot of weird stuff and beautiful stuff and ugly stuff, and let's go. So I had said Wednesday morning will be best. Let's have the painting stay in the crate, and the elevation change and the climate change, let's have it come back to just have it stay in the building. So on Wednesday, I took my graduate student, Wendy Lindsay. Some of you may know she was in LA as an intern at the Getty for a little while. We entered the room, and immediately I was wired, and met the videographer and 2 photographers and about a dozen people. So my first interaction with the artwork was with everybody, wanting to hear everything I said and thought. So we lined up and started looking at the painting. Prior to my entering the room, the registrar and the exhibition specialist had removed the backing, and then they had sort of propped the painting up onto an easel. And Wendy and I just kind of started there. Some of the things I sort of saw in the front. Now, this is when I did have some early photographs that had been sent to me, and I also had the condition and treatment reports from a statement from the 50s, a report from the 60s, and a report from the 70s. So I was taking the position that I'm going to look for what these reports say. I'm not going to focus on, I did kind of review my knowledge of de Kooning, but I was asked specifically to determine if this was the painting that was stolen. And so that's a key difference, what you are responding to. The painting had a very clear attribution and had never been contested previously. So I wasn't really authenticating de Kooning's work. I was authenticating that this was the painting that was stolen. So I was really interested in that. I knew there was a puncture below the signature. I figured even if it had had conservation, I would probably be able to see that. There was supposed to be a small puncture on the side that had a fill. I know what fills look like, so looked at that. And then there were these very distinctive cracks, the small horizontal cracks that were all over, particularly the bottom. Even I can tell that's from rolling. So we looked it over. I kind of took my phone flashlight and did some raking light, and just mainly what I was doing was buying a little time to see if moving this canvas was going to be a problem. You know, that just what was the surface condition, and if we were going to turn it over or manipulate it, how much could I do in that regard? So I was kind of talking to people the whole time, but mostly I was like, oh, okay, what am I going to do next? Going back to the treatment information as I knew it, the conservator at the National Gallery of Art in Kansas City, James Roth, some of you may have known, he had done some correction by adjusting keys in 1964, and then during this this tour that went to several countries that was organized by MoMA, there were certain things that were done, notably kind of a puncture in the left-hand corner that got a patch, and some B72 applied to the front, more damage, and there was supposed to be a wax lining. So that, I do know what wax looks like. I had an idea what wax from 1974 might look like, and I knew that these would be things that nobody else would know on the back. If you were going to forge the painting and only had images, you would know about all this stuff on the back. And so these were the things that I focused on. Just, oh, that's there, that's good, that's consistent, and I kind of moved on, sort of using a transmitted light, I guess it's transverse. That was really helpful again for me to just kind of see how much manipulation was going to be okay and just how consistent. And it really is instructive to see just how bad rolling an old canvas is for its condition. Lots and lots of cracks. We then were kind of moving forward and turned it over while it was in this new frame, not new, but the frame from the 80s, and began looking around. These were some of the insects that I found, and they weren't damaging the painting, but they were very consistent to me. Those are domestic shells and an ant body. That would, to me, and there was a lot of dust. It looked like coming out of a bedroom or a home. It didn't look, these would not have happened in the last few minutes or the last year. This would be stuff that would be consistent with what we were going with. We moved it from the frame. That produced a lot of sort of sawdust that we wanted to carefully collect and not have rub against the painting. You can also see the holes from the screws going straight through to the new tacking margin. We brought over an ultraviolet light, and that kind of helped me be able to point out to people that there was obviously some kind of acrylic applied to the surface at the beginning. There were some fills, these punctures that had been mentioned. I was able to see and point out to people that were watching. I also could see a little bit of how they had restretched the frame, because it looked like there was some polyvinyl acetate emulsion, kind of a white glue, and the staple gun. A lot of this benefited because this stolen painting was talked about 30 years later in an exhibition, kind of a little showing, and with the old frame displayed, and some press releases. And it was those press releases that caught the eye of the antique dealer that allowed him to understand that what he had might be the stolen painting. So in getting ready to compare them together, I found that the one that was left in the museum was actually filthy. It had been on display. So we just kind of quickly had to react and kind of brush back the original just to make it a little bit easier to handle. Wendy and I just brushed and vacuumed that section and then went back to the table. We stacked them, and you can see me in the picture here. I started looking at the matching edges from on this side and moved down around the table to this side. So we basically were able to see some differences. You can kind of see here where de Kooning wiped. This was the original margin, tacking margin, and he did this wiping a lot near the top. So these didn't really match as well. Over where the last tear was, where the blade had cut, there was this tear, and that matched very well with the loose strings here, threads from the canvas. The curators were a little bit excited about this drip here, and that wasn't as exciting for me, but I thought this one was really exciting. And that's right over here, so it was about the last thing I saw and said, that's really good. We have consistency. So we kind of proceeded with that. I just want to say what a preliminary authentication. Again, an authentication to say this is the one that was stolen, this is the one that's missing, is a little different than saying this is the one painted by de Kooning in 1954. That was a different question. I think any of us could be familiar with condition, conservation treatments, conservation materials, the history of their use, and what they might look like decades later. Going into something totally strange, being prepared to have magnification, have some brushes because what you're looking at might be really dirty. The area might be dirty. So having UV lamp, tweezers, being able to have a collection vials ready so that you can be able to study and get back to people. Doing a thorough examination, just like you're taught in school, to go very carefully over, especially if you're having to talk all the way through it. You want to be as methodical and put on your teaching hat. So that's really what it amounted to, and this is a video that I think is worth seeing because it expresses the emotion. This was the most emotional conservation project that I've been involved with, and really exciting.
Having a painting stolen from the museum is every museum employee's worst nightmare. The staff and the building is here to protect the artwork, to have it here for the benefit of the public. And so to have it be violated in such a way where the public can't have access to their art anymore, staff that worked here at the time still haven't recovered from that feeling of loss.
My job as a registrar is to manage the museum's collection. So my primary concern at all times is the care of the collection. This piece has seen a lot of violence in its past. I had never seen it before in person, and we turned it over.
There was sort of the realistic side of me that thought it may not come back. But then there's the part of me that did daydream about getting that phone call that I received of somebody saying on the other line, "I think I have your painting." I knew in my heart it was the painting, but we needed that conservator. We needed an expert voice to support that feeling.
So I think we'll just look at it first, kind of walk around it.
And so to watch Nancy work and to listen to her work, she's just a consummate professional and a great teacher.
There's the paint coming over.
And every time she made a point or made an observation, I would get more and more excited.
Color looks good.
And I was just waiting for that moment when she said, I'm confident that this is the painting.
There's actually evidence of that.
She hadn't said quite yet, yes, this is the painting.
Looks like it was white.
So I said, Nancy, is your opinion that this is our painting?
Well, I think we're all in agreement.
And she said yes. What clinched it for me personally was seeing incredibly perfectly how everything lined up.
Luckily, we actually have the full 2 canvases and can actually be reunited. Great team here.
Meg, our director, called it the Cinderella slipper moment, and that's what it was for me.
It is back together.
You know, there was a collective sigh of relief in the room.
Is anybody
And shock. I mean, shock that this is actually happening to us. I'm just overwhelmed by the honesty and the goodness of the people who found the painting and who did the right thing right away. They wanted it back at the museum as soon as possible. So just very quickly, what's next? The FBI is continuing their investigation, and boy, am I used to that. And they have had a second conservator, somebody that the FBI uses that wants to be, or the FBI wants them to be anonymous, that has looked at de Kooning's work before. The de Kooning Foundation is actively involved and will be a role in determining what the next conservation effort's going to be. Coincidentally, the head of that organization is a University of Arizona graduate, and yay. And we now have the beginnings of a committee that will look at. I've agreed to serve on that, and I'm really pushing for more of a investigative study, maybe more extensive use of imaging that the University of Arizona has on hand, and maybe involving more of the STEM technology and students, and really making it a university project. So the process may take longer, but in the end, I think it'll be an even better story. So my thanks to all the people that I worked with. They are just amazing. And thank you for letting me give a really recent story.
Thanks, Nancy. Does anyone have any questions?
I think the obvious question we all have is, are you intending to reunite the painting with the tacking margins that were cut off?
You know, I think that's what people want. That's what the curators want, is to have it all back together again. And I think that's a good idea. That's well beyond my, my background, but I think that'll be part of the discussion, and currently that's what they're thinking.
Could you just explain again how the original tacking margins got separated from the painting? I guess I didn't quite get that.
Oh, so the painting was framed and hanging on a wall.
The criminal came in with a blade and
Oh, okay.
started and went up, across, up, around, and got to the bottom and ripped the last 4 inches. So it was a blade. And it varied. It was, you can actually tell the direction by the cut curl, you know, of coming down.
Did they find paint on the floor? Did they save any chips?
No, they, not to my knowledge. I think it was pretty well adhered. The painting's actually for what it's been through, it's in pretty good condition. There's work to be done, but, oh my God, it could be a lot worse. I mean, it was cut, it was crinkled up real, I mean, not a big roll like those posters. It was tight to fit in his coat. Okay, great, thanks.